Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Lighthouse Sessions. In today's episode, I'm excited. I have my new friend Richard Stroupe with me. Richard and I are going to talk about some strange things, including Cape Fear. Richard, why don't you tell my audience just a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm Richard Stroupe. I am a venture capitalist. I operate a VC firm called Cape Fear Ventures based in North Carolina. I do split my time between Washington, D.C. and North Carolina. So we invest in emerging technologies, primarily in space, software as a service, artificial intelligence, and data science or data analytic type startups. So we are in the forefront looking for disruptive ideas, helping founders fulfill their dreams into a solid company.
I love that. Now, you and I are going to have some fun because I don't often get to talk to venture capitalists, and most of them, the reputation, it's more about the capitalist success. And I'm reading your profile, I can see you really care about the founders. So what sort of things are you looking for when you sit down with a potential founder? What's the no-go for you so that we don't waste your time? And then what's the green light path, the ones that you hope to find more often than not?
Sure. So my background is an operator. I've built and sold two different companies. I've bootstrapped myself, so I understand how to operate and grow a business for the long term for a potential exit. So now that I've transitioned more into an investor and an advisor, I focus on helping founders achieve the same success that I had without experiencing the same issues that I ran into. So one of the things that we look for, first off, when we are introduced to a company or a founder, I categorize them in either two buckets. Either they're still in discovery or they're in acceleration. So discovery means that they're still trying to discover themselves, trying to discover their customer segment, their technology solution fit, or even their team, trying to build a management team. Whereas in acceleration, most of those problems have already been solved, and they're just looking for capital to accelerate their idea into growth. So yeah, so we kind of look at four things when we are evaluating a potential investment idea. I call them the four T's. First off is the team. So I look for founders that have experience, that have some similar skill sets that I had in my background, um, experience, their pedigree, who are they working with, who their advisors are. So that team is very important because for the long haul, companies go through seasons like we have each year, and when sometimes there's good and sometimes there's bad. So you have to have a strong, experienced team to kind of to weather the storm, so to speak. Then we look at their technology. So we really understand the technology is what exactly did you build or solve? Why does that unmet need? What are you trying to fill? Do you have a patent? What is your moat? Really to kind of describe the technology in great detail. Talk about the competitors, maybe do a SWOT analysis on the technology. Then, of course, we look at traction. We look at their customer segments. Who are their customers? What are your pipeline? What's the backlog? So we always look at the traction side. Then, of course, the TAM. So when the four T's line up, then we can tell you exactly, are you in discovery or are you in acceleration mode? Then at that point, we can decide if it's a good fit for us.
I, I love that. And by the way, I love the fact that you bring that operator's mindset because I think sometimes people are looking too much at the numbers and not enough at the team. So
Correct. Yeah, we've seen really good ideas come through, but the team's not strong. And of course, if you don't have a strong team, you can't execute. Then we've seen great teams have a really nice idea, but the idea doesn't work, which is why the idea of pivoting comes through. So if you're really betting on the team, then it doesn't really matter what they're trying to do. If they have good skills, they have great quals, and they have a good solid bench of experience, then they can go through and pivot and readjust and still try to scale a business. And I've seen this firsthand with several investments that I had early in my career, going back 10, 12 years ago when I first started investing.
I love that. Now, I think it's been an interesting turn, as we see everybody. So I see LinkedIn and everybody's telling me that this is dead and that's dead, and I don't believe any of it. But what are some of the things that you see today that are still constant? Because everybody wants to tell you everything's changed, but I'm going to guess that as a venture capitalist, as an investor, there's still fundamentals that people need to be looking at. Is that fair?
Yes, it's very fair. I mean, right now with AI and the technology disruption that we're seeing, yes, we are seeing more tools come into the market and more opportunity for founders and potential entrepreneurs to develop core products using these tools that could be introduced to the market to, solve a problem. But fundamentally, it always goes to execution. Like I said, you could have a good idea, but if you have a poor execution, you never really can expand and scale the market fit for your idea. Also, sales, having a solid sales team and customer discovery. There's a lot of people that have that problem, where they have bias, where they think their product or idea is the best. And we do see them trying to raise money off of something that hasn't been fully validated. So again, that's why we try to take a step back and really, want to try to save them time and effort, and trying to understand. It's like, wait, what feedback have you received? What set of customers have used your product, and what works, what doesn't work? It's akin to like writing a dissertation or a thesis, right? You have a methodology, you have a hypothesis, and you have to have a customer subset, a sample size, so that you can go and do your experiment to find out whether or not it either passes or fails. So we see founders spend more time during that customer discovery and customer development, because any traction, I don't care how good your idea could be, if you can't sell it, you can't expect to raise capital off of it.
I love that. And I think I see a lot of founders who are spending way more time and energy focusing on their pitch deck. And I've watched countless episodes of shows like Shark Tank and Canadian Dragon's Den. Number one question is, what are your sales? And I had one who came to me and wanted some help and some guidance. 18 months in business. I'm not kidding, Richard. We diagnosed their sales funnel, and the problem was they didn't have a buy button on their website. And I was like, you're not ready for investment.
Yeah, I mean, entrepreneurship is very hard, right? I mean, it's easy to get a job and go to your 9 to 5, but then if you really want to start your own business, it's extremely hard. The failure rate is very high. So, but there's also this art behind it, because it is mainstream, and people, are very attracted to the idea of starting your own business, but they just don't understand the fundamental aspects of everything from building an MVP, a minimum viable product, and having a solid team, developing your customer pipeline and your strategy. A lot of folks just have an idea and they want to immediately go raise money and try to effectively, throw the risk onto the investor. And yes, there's a lot of investors out here, angel investors, venture capitalists, and the like. But they're not going to give you money unless the idea has traction, and unless the founders have very unique skills and have that experience and background into what you're trying to do. I mean, that builds confidence and trust. Without confidence, it's very hard to raise capital and scale your business.
I love that. And I think when we see these people, they're out there, they're perhaps very deeply in love with whatever they're working on. I think some of them stop and forget. So one of the things I see a lot is we serve everyone and we can do everything. And How many of those pitches do you see a day?
A lot, a lot. Yeah. We call it bowling the ocean, right? You can't expect to be everything to everybody. You got to pick
Yeah.
one customer segment, one silo of an issue, and then be very, very good. Be the best you can to that one customer segment, and then decide, can that idea or solution scale to other customer segments? So it's kind of like one of those crawl, walk before you can run scenarios. But yeah, we receive a lot of pitch decks that haven't been fully validated. Some that have no customers, that they just want to raise some pre-seed money so that they can go and basically buy that validation. Let's go buy some pilots. Let's sponsor some users, give them some free license or whatever, to kind of gain some of that traction. But they're paradox, right? We want to see the founders not only have their skin in the game, but also capital. So there has to be a point where each founder, if they truly believe their idea is scalable and their business works, that they should raise from either friends and family or put some bootstrap money just to get it to that validation threshold. Once it's validated, once you've got a customer segment and you've got some really good quals from customers, then you're a candidate for potential pre-seed funding.
I love that. And once upon a time in a past life, I did some virtual CFO work. I stopped doing it because people in pre-seed, they don't listen. But in this case, they brought me in to help manage their burn rate because they'd raised $2 million and they wanted to develop the best product possible before they ran out of money. And I kept annoying them because I was like, what's your product? What are you selling? And surprise, surprise, they went through the 2 million and they didn't even have a prototype. And I was like, and I love engineers. They're some of my favorite people, but they get so wrapped up in building the Swiss Army knife, they don't stop and ask, does anybody need something? They just keep building. And it's like,
Right.
how are you validating this? So how do you, as an investor, what are you looking for in terms of market validation? You talk about skin in the game, you talk about sales, but what are some of the slam dunks somebody can bring to you and say, hey, Richard, we did this. What do you wish everybody would bring to you when they have a presentation for you?
Well, I mean, obviously we ask for revenue traction and capture. If they're pre-revenue, then we ask how many beta users or how many pilots have they funded. Because typically before a customer, or you can sell something to a customer, you may want to give it out to a customer or have a subset of customers that you sponsor to use your product just to get that feedback. Because again, what's the point of scaling something that doesn't work or nobody wants? So if they've done their homework and they've sponsored some pilots or they have beta users, we ask, what is the feedback? What's the churn rate? How many customers are using your product? What have they said about the product? And sometimes we actually talk to the customers themselves just to get their direct, feedback as well. But we want to look for the customer acquisition. How are they acquiring customers? How are they keeping the customers? And then if the customers are leaving, we call that churn. What are the reasons why? Are they leaving for a competitor? Did they not like the product? Did it not work? So there, from a traction point of view, that's kind of what we focus on. Once you've got 10, 15, 20 customers, you kind of got something there. And then we want to know why, right? Why does it work? What do they love about it? And where do you think this can grow? Like, are there features or solutions that you can bolt on to your current offering that you can expand? Or are there other customer segments that have the same need that these customers have that you can kind of scale to? So it's that, again, the crawl, walk before you can run method. But then it kind of goes back to the team. Every company I find has a culture and has a unique footprint and why they exist. And usually it evolves around the founder story. So if the founder, doesn't have a compelling story or background or experience, it's kind of hard to kind of build a following around an idea, because typically that's what customers look for too, and they want the trust and confidence that this is going to work. And unfortunately, a lot of this is people and relationship driven. So that's one of the key things we look for, is that relationships, and what's driving the customer acquisition.
I love that. And for the record, Richard, the concept of relationships, I'm dyed in the wool go giver, love Bob Berg. And I think there's too little attention being paid to relationships. A lot of people talk about being, I'm self made, whatever. And yet, when I look at all of the successful people, I have a weird hobby. I study billionaires. Not one of them says, I did it all on my own. It's almost always, I had the right relationships. And I wish more founders would come out of the lab or come out of the R&D space and actually talk to humans.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, I was talking about this today on my own podcast. I had a guest, and his story was he started building websites when he was 14. That's how he got the bug to be a founder. And I'm like, how did you do that? He goes, well, his parents were technologists. Okay, but how did you find the first customer? Well, our friend worked in private equity, and he had a portfolio, and he asked me if I wanted to revamp their websites. So really, it falls back to who you surround yourself with. You need to put yourself in the situation to learn from others, to become a mentee, and let somebody be a mentor to you and show you the ropes. Bring you into the office and show you how this side works, and give you some examples of what you're trying to build. A lot of folks, they go to universities now, and they have this entrepreneurship major. And again, I love entrepreneurship as a theory, but I don't believe it should be a full major. It could be like a minor for sure, but
Yeah.
They get into this and they start falling in love with the process. Doing the pitch decks, doing the fundraising, and going to pre-seed, seed, and A. But that's not building a business. I mean, that's a professional fundraiser. We want somebody that's going to have core skills, either engineering, finance, sales, something strategic, and find that unmet need, then bolt on to the entrepreneurial process to raise capital. But we don't want you wasting your energy raising money. We want you building customers and building success with those customers, and then finding a repeatable pattern that you can do it over and over again and be the best at it that you possibly can. So yeah, there's a little bit of a gap there, but that's where we kind of come in and throw some cold water on some of their ideas and pitches. But we're not trying to be what we call hard ass, but we're just trying to say, look, this is real. Like, this is the real side of business. And you need to understand, it's like, do you want to, do you want to actually build a business, or do you want to pretend like go through the process of building a business? There's two separate things, but yeah.
Yeah, well, I won't name names, but I once judged a competition with young entrepreneurs, and I was fascinated by how little they knew about business. But man, could they put together a slide deck, and the animations were off the charts cool.
Yeah.
But it was like, you could tell they'd spent all this time researching and refining their pitch, but there was nothing about the business in there. It was all, it was just really tedious, dry stuff, and nothing that an entrepreneur would look at. And I love the idea of teaching it in university, but the thing about being an entrepreneur is it's not something you learn in a classroom. There's, a lot of my life lessons, and I'm sure yours, were the days when you fell flat on your face and went, whoops.
Yes.
And I don't know how you mimic that in a classroom.
Yeah, well, it's like going to the gym. You got to go put in the reps before you can hit your PR. Or, a lot of failure. You have to fail a lot. And that's another, not an issue, but it's a concern that I have, that universities and schools, condemn failure like it's a bad thing. And actually, it's a good thing, because you need to learn what you're not doing so that you can fix it and focus your energy to overcome that. I mean, how are you going to learn something without failing?
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it's an issue that we continue to see with pitches. We get a lot of pitches every week, and a lot of folks are looking for money, and it's a needle in the haystack moment now, especially with AI, because as you mentioned, you could go to AI and create some beautiful pitch decks and graphics and spend all your time, but again, that's not going to completely help you raise money. I mean, you do have to have a pitch deck, but what's behind the pitch deck is the traction, the technology, the team. That all that has to align, and it has to make sense.
I love that. And I think you and I are going to have another conversation on this, Richard, because it's fascinating to me how, what makes a founder unique is that they're outside that curve, the bell curve of normal. And then when you put it in AI, it pulls you to the average in the center.
Mm.
I would think, when I look at Shark Tank, again, not to say that that's reality, but it is, what most people know. They're investing in the founder as much as they are in whatever the pitch is, but it's their passion, it's their understanding of the business, it's the stuff that doesn't make it to the slide deck.
Hmm. Yeah, we hear that phrase. You bet on the jockey, not the horse.
Yeah.
And it's true. One of my very first investments was a U.S. Army veteran who was pitching a technology which I connected with immediately. Other people in the room that were part of my group did not connect with the technology, but really what was compelling was the founder, the team, that they had that military experience. They've gone through some trauma. They've dealt with hard times, and they know how to pivot and adjust when necessary. And when you have that type of resilience and grit as a founder, that's very compelling. So it doesn't really matter what is thrown at you; you're going to somehow figure it out. That's really what we look for in founders is, are you, when you are faced with some hard times, do you have the capability, do you have the team around you to figure it out, because you are going to face some hard times, 100%.
Yeah.
In his case, that team had to pivot hard. 2-3 years into their company, they had to change their whole strategy, but eventually it worked out for them. But again, having those hard decisions and being able to face them very quickly and make some really good decisions is a very difficult thing to handle, especially have no experience.
I love seeing founders who are building decision making skills because to me, I think, and I love the military. Any veteran owned business I will support day in, day out. A friend of mine taught sales as a veteran. And I said, "What made you switch to that?" And he said, Jeff, he was on the ground clearing insurgents in Afghanistan. And he said, "What I like about sales is even on my worst day, nobody shoots at me." And I was like, I can't put it in better perspective. Like nothing phases them because everything is soft and safe. Again,
Mhm.
it may not feel safe, but at least, as he said, nobody's shooting at you when you're having a bad day. So,
Right, exactly. No, that's pretty funny.
but for me personally, I do not trust anybody as a founder, as a funder, if they haven't failed at least at something, because it's not when we're successful. And I want your opinion on this. I've seen some people who got lucky the first time and they think they're God and they're invincible. I like the people who fell a couple times, got back up because they've got the humility to know that, it was not luck. They know it was skill, but
Yeah,
if they lose everything, they'll get back up tomorrow.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, there is some level of hubris when it comes to founders and success. Luck can strike twice, right? That's what they believe, and sometimes it can happen.
Yeah.
But again, it always comes back to the skills that founder has, the experience they have, the network they've built, and who they surround themselves with. And I tell my kids, and even when I guest lecture at universities, the most important thing, if you can take away anything from this conversation, it's you are who you surround yourself with. If you want to become a millionaire, go find 4 millionaires and learn how they did it. If you want to be a founder, if you want to learn how to pitch, if you want to learn how to raise money in the startups, Go join meetups that have startups. Go join pitch competitions. Every major city has some type of organization that's helping fund entrepreneurship or entrepreneurial efforts. Even universities are now doing this. They have an entrepreneurship center. They sponsor, you know, exited founders, come and talk to them, and you have to just immerse yourself in that kind of ecosystem to really, do a deep dive and understand everything about it, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And then you can decide if you want to jump in and try, swinging the bat, so to speak. So that's at least what I tell these kids. So.
I love it. Now, something in your profile I want to ask you because I was fascinated by it. You have a doctorate in technology. I'd never heard of that before today. What was your thesis in again?
I wrote a thesis about air gap cloud networks. So my second software company, Sequoia Holdings, we helped the federal government create its first air gap cloud. So this was back when Amazon was first building its own AWS. Well, the federal government needed to have its own version of AWS.
Yeah,
However, it had to be disconnected from the internet. So I used that experience in helping the government build their secure cloud in doing more of a comparative analysis on cyber attacks of air gap clouds, specifically multi-clouds, where you have more than one vendor, say Oracle, Microsoft, AWS, Google. So having fun people that have that experience in multi-cloud, specifically air gap clouds, and then we go through a deep dive of all the cyber attacks and figuring out what happened, how did you fix it, what did you learn,
yeah,
where's that data, and how does the future look? And one of the striking conclusions that we found, there's a lot of research in Israel. I mean, it's Israel and China had a ton
yeah,
of research, even some Russian articles when I was doing my sourcing of background. But one of the clearest examples of cyber attacks today is all insider threat. And even in the
yeah,
face of AI, AI is creating the opportunity to not only harden systems, but also find ways to attack systems. But it always comes down to insider threat. It's not somebody with a key that plugs into their computer, or the phishing. The phishing stuff is getting pretty good as well.
yeah,
So a lot of attacks happen through the phishing, but we're getting smarter about that. But really, it's the insider threat. It's the people that become disenchanted with the organization, that get somehow emotionally tied to a purpose, and then they figure out they need to help their mission and end up spilling the beans, I guess you could say. So a lot more effort has to be put on that. But that's the research I did. But yeah, the doctorate of technology I completed at Purdue University. It was a new offering with their Polytechnic institute there. So I thought it would be kind of cool to go back and get my doctorate. That was around COVID as well. So I had to
yeah.
have something to do.
Had time on your hands, right? I'm sure you
Yeah.
get this all the time, but I'd love to find your thesis and read it. I have
Yeah.
strange hobbies.
The link is on my LinkedIn profile under publications. You
Perfect.
can find it there. Yeah.
I'm sure people are begging for it. So between you and me, once upon a time, I was talking to somebody who works with neurodiverse children, and she said something that stuck with me. The threat actors, they actively recruit people with autism because if they're incredibly gifted, and if they believe in your cause, they will justify whatever it takes to follow the cause. But when the FBI kicks in the door and finds them, they're left alone, and whoever was using them is gone. I have two neurodiverse kids, and I was like, you buggers, I'm going to help people that hunt you down. So you and I are going to
Yeah.
have another conversation just on that.
That sounds nice. Look forward to
Now,
that.
you mentioned your LinkedIn profile. So I don't want people listening to this going, okay, I'm going to start inundating Richard. And by the way, I love some of your content. I've been trying to comment and post. When should somebody reach out, and what's the best way to connect with you to find out about collaborating in some way?
Sure. Yeah, the best way to reach out to me is my LinkedIn profile. That I routinely get messages there, and I have a link there on my calendar that you can also book a 30-minute meeting with me. I've basically opened up some, I guess, office hours where people can book time, and that's been very successful. I started doing that a couple weeks ago, and I've had some really good conversations. So yeah, that's the best way to reach out to me.
Awesome. Well, Richard, I want to thank you. You and I are going to have more conversations. I love meeting the people who help. I call our founders, we're the outliers, because nobody in their right mind would leave a 9 to 5 to become a founder if they knew what it entailed. But thank you for being on the show, and thank you for sharing your wisdom.
Absolutely. Thank you again, Jeff.